In 1964, a young Michael Caine walked onto a film set in South Africa for the very first time. He was 30 years old, completely unknown, and about to play a man whose real story was far stranger and far sadder than anything the cameras would capture. The film was Zulu, and Caine's character was Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, an officer of the 24th Regiment of Foot who helped defend a tiny mission station called Rorke's Drift against thousands of Zulu warriors in 1879. Caine played Bromhead as a foppish, slightly dim aristocrat, all plummy vowels and puzzled looks, opposite Stanley Baker's no-nonsense Lieutenant Chard. That class friction between the two officers runs through the entire film. It's brilliant cinema, but it isn't history. And what actually happened to the real Gonville Bromhead, both during and after that desperate night, is a story worth telling properly. Incidentally, whilst the name is spelled Bromhead, it's actually pronounced Bromhead. His family would have been quite particular about that. Bromhead came from Lincolnshire landed gentry, comfortable, well-connected, but not the aristocracy Caine's performance suggests. The family seat was Thirlby Hall, and the Bromheads had been producing soldiers for generations. His great-grandfather had fought under Wolfe at Quebec in 1759. His grandfather had served in the American Revolutionary War, survived the destruction of his regiment at Freeman's farm, where he was one of only 3 men in his unit not killed or wounded, and was then captured at Saratoga. He spent over 3 years as a prisoner of war before eventually rising to lieutenant general and being created a baronet by King George III for his service during the Irish Rebellion of 1798. And then there was Bromhead's father, Edmund, the one Michael Caine mentions in the film. My father was at Waterloo. That's true, but it needs qualifying. Edmund Bromhead was in Lieutenant General Sir Charles Colville's 4th Division, positioned about 8 miles west of the main battle, guarding Wellington's right flank against a French outflanking movement that never came. So, whilst he was at the Waterloo campaign, he didn't fight in the battle itself. He did fight the French, though. After Napoleon's abdication 6 days later, Colville's division stormed the town of Cambrai by scaling its ancient walls. Edmund Bromhead led a forlorn hope in that assault and lost an eye in the process. But he never got the colonelcy his son claims in the film. He retired as a major, inherited the baronetcy when his elder brother died, and settled down at Thirlby Hall with his wife Judith. They had 10 children. The youngest, Gonville, was born at Versailles in France on the 29th of August, 1845. 3 of Gonville's brothers served in the army. The eldest, Edward, fought with the 4th Regiment in the Crimea and died in Burma in 1869. Benjamin inherited the baronetcy and served in India. Charles was commissioned in the 24th Regiment, the very regiment that would fight at Rorke's Drift, and would eventually command its 2nd Battalion in the late 1880s. With that sort of family tradition behind him, there was really only one career Gonville was ever going to follow. After school at Magnus Grammar in Newark-on-Trent, he purchased an ensign's commission in the 2nd Battalion of the 24th in April 1867. An ensign was the lowest officer rank in the infantry, roughly equivalent to a 2nd lieutenant today. He was promoted to lieutenant in October 1871, and there he stuck. 8 years later, when the Anglo-Zulu War broke out, he was still a lieutenant. 12 years in the army and just 1 promotion. Not exactly a glittering trajectory, particularly for a Bromhead. The reason wasn't hard to find. Gonville Bromhead was going deaf. His hearing had been deteriorating for some time, and whilst the historian Ian Knight has argued it didn't affect his ability to command, it certainly affected how others perceived him. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Dagashire, privately described him as hopeless. Major Francis Clary, a senior staff officer, later wrote that Bromhead was a capital fellow at everything except soldiering. Clary also observed that the height of his enjoyment seemed to be to sit all day on a stone on the ground, smoking a most uninviting-looking pipe. None of this suggests incompetence. It suggests a man who was popular, likable, physically capable. He was an accomplished boxer and cricketer, but who simply wasn't driven by ambition. His men in B Company liked him. His superiors didn't rate him. That's a distinction worth keeping in mind. In early 1878, the 2nd Battalion was sent to South Africa during the 9th Cape Frontier War against the Xhosa. Bromhead took part in several operations, and during an assault on a Xhosa position, B Company's commander, Captain Godwin Austen, was accidentally shot by one of his own men. Invalided home, Godwin Austen's departure left command of B Company temporarily in Bromhead's hands. That war ended in June 1878, and the 2nd Battalion joined the 1st in Natal, preparing for the coming conflict with the Zulu Kingdom. When Lord Chelmsford's Central Column crossed the Buffalo River into Zululand on the 11th of January 1879, B Company found themselves left behind, guarding the supply depot at the mission station of Rorke's Drift. Some of his men grumbled. They were missing the action because their temporary commander wasn't considered first-team material. Whether that was fair or not, it was certainly the perception. They were still there 11 days later. On the 22nd of January, overall command of the post rested with Major Henry Spaulding, but around midday he'd decided to ride 15 miles back into Natal to find out what had happened to G Company, who were supposed to be coming up to relieve them. Before leaving, Spaulding consulted the Army list, the official register of officer seniority, and identified Lieutenant John Chard of the Royal Engineers as the senior officer in his absence. There was no showdown, no dramatic confrontation over who outranked whom. Spaulding simply checked the list, which showed Chard had been a lieutenant 3 years longer than Bromhead. That settled, Spaulding rode off. Chard went back to working on a pontoon bridge down by the river, and Bromhead was left with B Company at the station. Just after 3 o'clock that afternoon, 2 riders from Zululand galloped up to Chard at the river crossing and gave him staggering news. The British garrison at Isandlwana, about 10 miles across the border, had been destroyed. The riders then carried on towards the mission station. By the time Chard reached the post to take command, Bromhead had already been at work for some time. Together with Acting Assistant Commissary James Langley Dalton, a former long-service sergeant with far more combat experience than either officer, Bromhead had begun barricading the storehouse and hospital, loopholing walls, and constructing a defensive perimeter from wagons, mealie bags, and biscuit boxes. He'd ordered the tent struck to give his men clear fields of fire. He'd already sent a rider for help. The film gives these decisions to Chard. In reality, Bromhead had taken them before Chard arrived. It was Dalton, incidentally, whose tactical judgment was arguably the most important of all. He'd argued firmly against any attempt to retreat, pointing out that a small column burdened with hospital patients in open country would be easily overtaken and destroyed. Stand and fight was the only option. Dalton himself would receive the Victoria Cross for his actions that day. The garrison at Rorke's Drift numbered somewhere between 139 and 156 men, including around 36 who were sick or wounded in the makeshift hospital. Late that afternoon, between 3,000 and 4,000 Zulu warriors, the reserve force from Isandlwana, belonging to the Undi Corps, crossed the border and surrounded the mission station. The defenders were outnumbered at least 25 to 1. The Zulus attacked the south wall first at around 4:30. The fighting was brutal and sustained. By 6 o'clock, the hospital had become untenable, and the famous defense of its rooms, soldiers hacking through internal walls with bayonets to evacuate patients room by room, began. 9 of the 11 patients inside survived. A secondary wall of biscuit boxes had been built across the center of the compound as a fallback position, but the Zulus had arrived before it could be properly completed. There was a gap, and the Zulus knew it. They kept trying to rush through. Bromhead led a small group of men defending that gap. Private Frederick Hitch was among them. What happened at that position was, by Hitch's own account, the hardest fighting of the entire night. 3 of the defenders were killed. Everyone except Bromhead was wounded. When Hitch took a bullet through the shoulder, a Zulu warrior closed in to finish him with an assegai. Bromhead shot the man with his revolver. Then Bromhead did something quietly remarkable. He helped the wounded Hitch remove his tunic, handed him his own revolver, and assisted him in loading it so he could keep fighting one-handed. Bromhead himself switched to a rifle. Not to waste one round, he told his men. According to Hitch, the 2 of them held that position alone for roughly an hour and a half. Bromhead and me had it all to ourselves, Hitch later recalled, the lieutenant using his rifle and revolver with deadly aim. When Hitch had been first hit, Bromhead's only words were, "I am very sorry to see you down." As the night wore on, the Zulu attacks gradually slackened. By midnight, the assaults had become sporadic. By 4 in the morning, the firing stopped. At dawn, the Zulus withdrew. not with any cinematic salute to fellow warriors, as the film suggests, but because they were utterly exhausted. Many had been marching and fighting for 6 days without proper rest or food. Around 8 o'clock, what remained of Chelmsford's central column arrived, retreating from Zululand. Around the mission station lay some 350 Zulu dead. The British had lost 17 killed. At least 15 were wounded. Bromhead recommended 6 men of B Company for the Victoria Cross. Lord Chelmsford added Bromhead's and Chard's names to the list. In total, 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded for the defense of Rorke's Drift, still the most ever given for a single action. Not everyone approved. When General Sir Garnet Wolseley arrived in South Africa to replace Chelmsford, he called the number of awards monstrous, arguing that the defenders had fought so hard because they'd had no choice. Lieutenant Henry Curling was blunter. "Bromhead is a stupid old fellow," he wrote, "as deaf as a post. Is it not curious how some men are forced into notoriety?" Perhaps. But Curling hadn't been at the gap in the wall with Hitch. Bromhead was promoted to captain and then brevet major. He returned to Britain to a hero's reception. The villagers of Thurlby presented him with an illuminated address and a revolver. The city of Lincoln gave him a sword. He was invited to dine with Queen Victoria at Balmoral. He missed it. He was fishing in Ireland and only received the invitation when he got back. The Queen sent him a photograph instead. She never asked again. Chard, who accepted his invitation, rather caught the Queen's fancy. Bromhead didn't seem particularly bothered. What did bother him, apparently, was the battle itself. Those who knew him noticed the change. Bromhead became withdrawn and lethargic. Clary observed that he became visibly upset whenever Rorke's Drift was mentioned. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to relive it. There's no formal diagnosis, of course. The Victorians didn't have a vocabulary for what we'd now recognize as post-traumatic stress. But the pattern is familiar enough. Quietly, though, he looked after his men. When Private Henry Hook, another of the 11 Victoria Cross recipients, was discharged from the army on medical grounds and struggled to find work, it was Bromhead, together with Lord Chelmsford and the Prince of Wales, who secured him a position at the British Museum. Hook would work there for over 20 years. After the fuss died down, Bromhead's career resumed its modest, unhurried pace. In 1880, he followed the 2nd Battalion to Gibraltar, then on to India. He was sent back to England briefly in 1882 to attend the School of Musketry at Hythe in Kent, where he gained a first-class extra certificate, not bad for a man his superiors considered hopeless. He returned to India and was promoted to full major in 1883. Between 1886 and 1888, the battalion, by then renamed the 2nd Battalion, South Wales Borderers, following the Childers reforms, served in the 3rd Anglo-Burmese War. After Burma, the battalion was posted back to India. It had been away from Britain for 13 years. It wouldn't return home until 1893. It came back without Bromhead. Major Gonville Bromhead, Victoria Cross, died of typhoid fever on the 9th of February 1891 at Allahabad, India. He was 45 years old. He was buried in the New Cantonment Cemetery. Michael Caine made him a household name 13 years before Caine was even born. The film turned a quiet, partially deaf, pipe-smoking officer, a man whose greatest enjoyment was apparently sitting on a stone all day, into a foppish screen aristocrat. The real Bromhead wasn't dim, and he wasn't grand. He was the 10th child of a gentry family with a long military tradition. A man who followed the only path that was really open to him, without much ambition, but with a stubborn decency that showed itself when it mattered most. At the gap in the wall at Rorke's Drift, with the wounded Hitch beside him and the dead around them, he held the line. His Victoria Cross is held at the Regimental Museum of the Royal Welsh in Brecon. His grave in Allahabad is a long way from Thurlby Hall. If you enjoyed this, do take a look at some of my other episodes on the Anglo-Zulu War.